Good afternoon. Welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider, each week with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us here each Wednesday at 3 p.m. to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And now, with no further ado, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey. Good evening from Israel. Obviously, again, we've talked about this quite a bit. When I'm asked to write the description of the event, it's usually a few days in advance. And a few days ago, everyone was talking about last week's terror attacks, which claimed the lives of 11 people. So it was very important to talk about those, but obviously today we're talking about something else completely. Let's start at the end. At 6:46, one of Israel's foremost political commentators, Amit Segal, released to the news that Idit Silman, who is actually the coalition whip, had resigned from the coalition. Now, this caught everybody by surprise. As we know, the coalition has 61 votes, 61 seats to the opposition's 59. So what this does, essentially, is it evens up the number. It makes it into a tie, 60 each. 60 each, which leaves us in a bit of a limbo. So what is this? Why did this come about? First of all, since this government was formed, those who were considered right-wing religious members were essentially targeted by the opposition, which is seen itself as a right-wing religious opposition, and it tried to identify certain quote-unquote weaker links that it could maybe persuade or harass, might be more accurate. Beginning was considered one of those weaker links. She was harassed. They had outside her house regular demonstrations. Her husband at work apparently was harassed. Her children in the youth organization that they belonged to were harassed. She was harassed in her synagogue. She was harassed at weddings that she went to, at family events. She was harassed on the street. According to her, she was even physically assaulted at a gas station, petrol station at one point. It was a lot of pressure put on her, not just on her, but she was definitely identified as one of the weaker links. Throughout these 10 months, she has pretty much sat relatively quietly in the coalition. She's done her work as the coalition whip, made some mistakes, but that's to be expected from a relatively rookie politician, especially in such a pressure job as the coalition whip, with such narrow margins between the opposition and the coalition. But lately, she's definitely come out on certain issues which she understands is closer to her base as a right-wing religious woman. Ostensibly, the issue which was the straw that broke the camel's back was this idea that during Pesach, for those observant Jews amongst us, know that you're not allowed to eat leaven, what's called chametz, and for a number of years, hospitals were basically the guards at hospitals around the country were telling people not to bring in any food that has chametz, that has any leavened bread or anything like that. But then in 2020, a secular movement took that to court, and basically the Supreme Court decided that there's no legal basis for that, and guards cannot ask anyone entering hospitals during Passover festival to bring, not to bring in leavened bread, chametz, whatever it is. This happened under Netanyahu, and last year, for example, the Supreme Court ruling was upheld during the right-wing religious government led by Netanyahu. This year, the Minister of Health Nitzan Horowitz from the Meretz party, which is a left-wing secular party, sent out a letter to hospital administrators or managers or director generals saying to uphold that Supreme Court ruling. Apparently that incensed Idit Silman, who is the head of the health committee in the Knesset, and she said this is a disgrace. A person like that has no right to be a minister in a government of a Jewish state, and she really lambasted the health minister on it. Most people thought, okay, she wants to have her say, she wants to look tough, she wants to look like she's standing by her principles, but it will die down. Prime Minister Bennett said pretty much the same thing. This is not a major issue, don't worry about it, we'll fix it, everyone just has to calm down a little bit. Amazingly, as I said, when the country woke up at 6:46 to this announcement, amazingly, Prime Minister Bennett apparently heard about it the same as the rest of us. He was completely taken by surprise, according to people around him. It wasn't something that he foresaw. But what had happened is that, again, because of the pressure, because perhaps she saw the writing on the wall, as we know, Yamina, as a party that won 7 seats at the last elections, immediately one of those. Amichai Shikli left, well, didn't leave Yamina officially, but he decided not to go into the government and basically acted as a singular vote in the opposition on behalf of Yamina. And so basically, Prime Minister Bennett, who has, well, now he has 5 seats, but before that he had 6 seats, just didn't seem to be able to get his people in line. A lot of people attributing this to, the demands of the job. As Prime Minister, he's involved with diplomatic issues, security issues, many, many national issues every minute of the day. What he didn't do enough of, people are saying, including a member of his own party, is pay attention to what's going on on the ground politically. It does seem that almost all of the polls that have come out have not seen them move up at all in the polls. They haven't gained anything according to really pretty much 95, 99% of the polls. And they even, people who have dissected the polls say that all of the none of the votes that they would receive today are their base, which is, again, that right-wing religious. Bennett perhaps was trying to attract a more centrist, perhaps more traditionally minded or even secular minded, centrist or center-right. So he was doing things that perhaps his base wouldn't approve of. One of his members of Knesset today, apparently in a meeting when he called the other remaining members of the party to a meeting, they accused him of not taking enough care politically, not caring enough about his base. Naftali Bennett himself used the term West Bank to refer to the area over the Green Line. Now, while most of the world uses the term West Bank, in Israel, especially on the right, the term West Bank is never used. It's Judea and Samaria, and especially as a former chairman of the Yesha Council, which is the council representing Israeli citizens that live over the Green Line, Judea and Samaria, it was very surprising and even shocking to hear him use those terms. Some say that, again, when US Secretary of State Blinken accused settlers of violence, he didn't stand up to him. And there's various other things. They didn't build enough in the settlements. There's a lot of accusations that certain members of the party have on him. So where does that leave us today? It basically leaves us in a bit of, well, not a bit, in paralysis. There are a few different scenarios going forward and how this can play out. The one way, which is what the coalition leaders, from the beginning of this coalition, I have spoken about the fact that if it was left up to coalition leaders, this government would probably realize its full term. They know how to work together despite some disagreements. They understand the necessity to work together, the necessity to compromise on certain issues, and that's the way it's mostly been. But there are obviously other members within each of their parties. But the leaders met today after this shock announcement and basically said that they would like to carry on the government for as long as possible. What it does mean, though, is in the Knesset, as far as votes are concerned, they don't have a majority. If everybody turns up and everybody votes, according to the coalition and opposition lines, no laws will be passed from this moment on. Certainly no basic laws, which are sort of quasi-constitutional laws, which are above regular laws, which you need 61 votes to pass. The other thing that is now certain not to pass is the budget, which they have to pass by March next year. Now, in recent weeks, we've been hearing a lot, especially from Finance Minister Avigdor Lieberman, that he wanted to push the budget issue off the table for the 2 years subsequent, because there is a budget for this year, by dealing with that in the next couple of months. Now, there is no way that that will pass because you need a 61. So this government, at most, unless the really unthinkable happens and someone comes across from the opposition, which I think is exceedingly unlikely and the least likely scenario here. So basically, this government, at the best case scenario, has until March 2023. Now, the opposition has a couple of options here. The most likely is that they will try and get one more vote to get that 61 to pass a law to disperse the Knesset. A law to disperse the Knesset means basically this Knesset is over and we have 90 days or 100 days, I can't remember how long it is, until the next elections. That is the most likely scenario because all they need now is one more vote. And there is talk that probably another Yamina person may go. At the moment, no one is coming forward, but that could all change pretty soon. Apparently, Abiy Kara was part of this meeting with Idit Silman, who had also with Amichai Shikli, the renegade, the original renegade Yamina, and they were going to form a faction because this is also important. As things stand, if there are elections, Idit Silman, who has been promised for her defection, to basically be number 10 on the Likud list and be the next Minister of Health. Now, according to Knesset rules, as things stand, she will not be able to run in the next elections because she left her party. And once you leave your party in a Knesset, you can't run with an established list in the next elections. So as things stand, she cannot run. But if another member of Yamina leaves and they join with Shikli and Idit Silman, they can form a breakaway party because you need over a third of a party to join a breakaway party. Then you can have full funding, then you can run in the next elections, etc., etc. But as I said, I think that most likely scenario is someone will be convinced by Yamina because now they see the writing on the wall, and this is a government which will be almost completely paralyzed. Obviously, it can pass governmental decisions, executive decisions, but as far as the Knesset goes, it's basically going to be almost complete paralysis. That's the most likely. Another scenario is a vote of no confidence, which basically needs not just a vote of 61, but you need to form a government with 61 seats. And what the problem is here, even though the opposition is now up to 60 seats, 6 of those are with the Joint Arab List, which will not sit in any Netanyahu-led government. So basically, they have 54 at this point. So they would need at least 7 to be able to form a government because you have to lay out that government, who's going to lead it, who's going to be the ministers, who are the people who would sign on to such a thing. The only party available with those sort of numbers is Blue and White. And we get back to the point of Defense Minister Benny Gantz. And we know Benny Gantz has sat with former Prime Minister Netanyahu in the past and was promised to be Prime Minister. And obviously we know that that promise was reneged on. So there's a lot of distrust between the two. But if Benny Gantz was promised rotation to be Prime Minister immediately and first, maybe the game would change. The other thing that is important to note is if there was a law to disperse the Knesset, according to coalition agreement, the moment after, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, the leader of the Yesh Atid party, would immediately become Prime Minister. Now, why is that important? First of all, it gives Naftali Bennett a sort of threat to some of the members of his right-wing party that if you go to the other side and we do pass a dispersal of Knesset law, Yair Lapid, this left-wing, as they would probably frame him, or left of center leader, would then become Prime Minister. And as we know from every single poll that has been undertaken for the last 3 years, neither bloc has a majority, which could mean we could have not just one election coming, but maybe another one on top of that, and who knows, maybe another. another one on top of that. That could mean that Yair Lapid is Prime Minister of Israel for months, if not a year. Now, that is obviously a threat, and that also may play into Benny Gantz's decision-making, because Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid are not just political rivals, they also have major personal differences between them. So these are all the factors. On the other side, Netanyahu certainly prefers the option of going to elections. He believes that he will only strengthen in the polls, and he has certainly strengthened the polls, but again, there has not been a single poll which has shown his bloc receiving the necessary 61. So either they would need someone to come across from the other side, or we would go for another set of elections. Some of his partners want different things. As we know, Aryeh Deri took a plea bargain, the leader of Shas, a couple of months ago, which meant that he has to step down from the Knesset, but he can run in the next Knesset, which means Shas would want new elections because they would want their leader back in the Knesset. The Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party, United Torah Judaism, does not want new elections. They would like to form an alternative government within this Knesset. And in fact, one of the leaders of the party, Moshe Gafni, interestingly said this morning that it's time that the opposition also did a bit of soul searching. And perhaps it is time for someone else to lead the opposition and would-be government with someone who has more likelihood of forming the government, which was a direct attack to a certain extent on Netanyahu. Now, subsequently, he retracted his comments and said he was misunderstood, even though everyone heard the words very clearly and they're on record. But it does show that there is an openness there to consider someone else other than Netanyahu to lead the government. That's unlikely to happen just because Netanyahu will not allow it. But perhaps that sort of flexibility is what someone like Benny Gantz is looking for. Benny Gantz, as we know, has pretty good relations with the ultra-Orthodox parties. I'm sure that they will be reaching out to him day and night to try and see what he needs and offer him the world. Whether Netanyahu signs on or not is a whole other thing. The days, I believe that the next few days, there is a momentum towards the opposition, towards the right-wing religious opposition. They held a big demonstration in the government court outside the prime minister's office this evening. It was a bit of a show of strength. Netanyahu spoke. It was all smiles, all cheers, all applause, singing and dancing. So they definitely feel that they have the momentum. They feel it's only a matter of a short amount of time until this government falls. As I said, this government does now have a ticking clock. Maximum it can survive is March, unless something unthinkable happens, which I don't see at this point. So those are sort of the scenarios to play out. My particular view is that someone else from Yamina, there's a very strong likelihood that they will leave because they'll see the writing on the wall. They'll look at their, just as Idit Silman did, look at her own personal future and say, well, this government is done anyway. I may as well not go down with this sinking ship. Yamina is polling minimally. This government has already got a shelf life on it. So why should I go down with it? There'll be a lot of pressure. If it can survive, at least the next few weeks until the Knesset returns in May, perhaps there will be the momentum of the opposition will be halted a little bit, and perhaps we'll get back into some sort of status quo. Again, where there will be political parliamentary paralysis, perhaps, but at the government level, it's possible that they'll still be able to do some of the reforms that they set out at the beginning of the Knesset in their wide and holistic agenda. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on this or any other issues relating to Israel.
All right, thank you so much. So the first question is, if the coalition government with the tie is unable to pass any laws, why would it want to stay in power until March 2023?
Well, first of all, because the alternative is not to be in power at all. Don't forget there's many, many ministers there who still have ministries to run. And as I said, that there's still a lot they can do at the ministerial level, the government level. They can pass executive decisions at the ministerial level, just not laws. The difference between laws and what are called government decisions, our government decisions can be easily just replaced in a subsequent government. A law has to be then relitigated and go through the whole process with the committees and all the 3 votes, and etc. So it's always preferable on an important issue for something to go through the Knesset. But there's still a lot that can be done between now and then. Every minister in their ministry has a plan, has something that they'd like to do, and don't forget to go into elections tomorrow, as opposed to after 6 months, when perhaps the economy is looking a bit better, perhaps some of the ministers have got a few more achievements behind them, is a very different proposition.
Thank you for clarifying that. And a follow-up to that, how does the Israeli public feel about the current situation?
Well, that was polled tonight immediately, and there's always going to be a sort of reflex feeling about this, and sometimes it's best to let the dust settle, but that's not what they pay pollsters for. And the numbers were sort of almost a third want to carry on with this government. A bit less than that would like to see an alternative government, in other words, the right-wing religious government, and around 20%, so it's not really a third, the final part, but 20% would like to go to elections. So it shows that the majority would like this to be worked out at the political level without having to go back to the public, because there is a weariness about elections. And again, because of the polls that we saw even tonight, all of the major TV stations did polls, and again, it meant deadlock if those results came out after elections. So the government, the people, 4/5 of the people at least, just would not like to go to elections. So there are those scenarios where we don't go to elections. My feeling is that eventually is what will happen, whether it's days, weeks, or months. Eventually, we will just go to another elections, and perhaps even other elections beyond that.
Thank you. Eric asked, did the Likud break the law by offering Silman a spot? Will she now vote with the opposition? I guess since she resigned, no, but.
Well, the second question, yes, she will now sit with the opposition. As far as breaking the law, there is a law that you're not allowed to offer someone a future position. That all goes back to the days of Yitzhak Rabin. No, it's Shimon Peres, the so-called stinky maneuver at the end of the 80s, where positions were offered to try and break up the government, and then they legislated that you can no longer do that. But it's a relatively vague law, and it's pretty much been done in the last few years. I think the NGO movement for quality of government, or government quality, whatever it's called, has already petitioned the Supreme Court about this. But again, I don't think anything's been signed anywhere or anything's official. So I think it'll be very hard to overrule it. But again, as I said, as things stand, if we went to elections tomorrow, Idit Silman would not be able to stand on the Likud slate, but she could still be a minister without being a member of Knesset, because we have many of those currently. So I think that's where those issues stand at the moment.
Thank you. Len gets asked, in between all these coalition issues, who's watching the progress on the Iran deal?
It's a very good question. If you ask some who are critical of the fact that Prime Minister Bennett is not focusing enough on the ground politics, he's very much involved in the Iran issue. In fact, it seems so long ago, but it was only a few days ago, it came out that another way that they were going to ensure that the turnover between Bennett and Lapid would actually take place, which was supposed to take place in the latter part of 2023, was that Naftali Bennett, whatever position he took after, would still be in charge of the Iran dossier. I'm not particularly worried. There are a lot of diplomats involved in this, a lot of security officials involved in this. Certainly, the Prime Minister will have been distracted today, and will certainly be distracted in the days to come. Will perhaps need to care and pay more attention to what's going on, domestically, politically. But I wouldn't worry. It's not as if Israel's going to stop functioning in the days and weeks ahead. Israel managed to function for 2 years without a stable government. So I'm not overly worried. I'm not, like everyone in Israel, we're worried about the way things are moving and the agreement. And Iran's move towards nuclear weapons capability, but I'm not particularly worried about Israel's leadership attention span on this issue because it is so important.
Thank you. And another question on current affairs. Ken Miller asked if the government, Carrie Hillebrand asked, will Aliyah from the Ukraine be impacted?
No, again, because Aliyah is not, there's no real laws that need to be passed. Government decisions can be taken, whether it's in the Ministry of Aliyah and Absorption, whether it's the Finance Ministry if they need to find money. As I said, the ministers have worked very well on this issue and most issues throughout this government. So most of the issues that do not need a law to be passed in the Knesset will continue. And when it comes to Aliyah, there's pretty much crossbench consensus on the need to help anyone who needs to make Aliyah, especially at the moment from the Ukraine.
Thank you. Now to Ken Miller's question. If the government issues executive orders, since there's no constitution in Israel, how does the Israeli Supreme Court base their decisions as being illegal?
On a government decision? Well, first of all, as I said, there are quasi-constitutional laws, which are what is of course the basic laws, but there will be no more new ones of those. But we do have quite an activist Supreme Court in Israel, which sometimes take on issues that they were not even asked to necessarily. So they can take on an issue that they believe is against the character of the state. Again, some of the basic laws on the nature of the state, whether it's the Jewish nature of the state, basic rights, and all those sort of things. The Supreme Court will look at those and will judge whether any of the executive decisions. Again, I use the term executive decision just because it's the most familiar to our American viewers. We don't have a presidential system, so there is no one person who has executive power. The executive power is invested in the government, but each ministry has the opportunity to do what's called Haflatat Memshala, a sort of a government decision. So if it decides, like for example, the agricultural reform, if the agricultural ministry wants to continue with the reform, even though it will have zero chance of passing the Knesset, it can still continue to do it at the ministerial level.
Thank you so much. And I don't believe the coalition was able to get around to passing any term limits or anything like that. But Len Levin asked, could Netanyahu be eligible as prime minister again so soon?
He's eligible yesterday, today, and tomorrow. There's nothing to prevent him. The court cases are going on, and there's been quite some fascinating events taking place there with some of the state witnesses giving some very open and from the Netanyahu camp, some worrying statements about what Netanyahu did, in these cases of breach of trust and fraud and some of these other serious allegations. But until, if and when he's convicted, he can continue to try to be prime minister and even serve as prime minister. There is, another question that's come up in Israel is, does this make a plea bargain more likely or less likely? Some say it makes it more likely because he has a stronger hand with the state prosecution office. I believe it makes it less likely because now there's a good likelihood at some point in the near future that he may return to office and maybe be able to pass one of those laws that ensures the court case either is put off until after he's prime minister, perhaps is taken away completely, or allows him to run even if he is convicted. These are all laws that have been broached in the past by members of the Likud. Netanyahu keeps on claiming they're nothing to do with me, I didn't even know about them, but it's clear that that's not strictly true. So now that the chance has certainly increased that he could return to being prime minister and possibly passing these laws, I think there'll be less of an impetus for him to take any potential plea bargain. So in my mind, it certainly lowers those chances.
Thank you. And you did say that if Netanyahu-less government is unlikely, but is there truth to that statement that you mentioned earlier about it being easier to form a right-wing government without him?
That's been true since the beginning. If Netanyahu would have allowed someone else in, and it could to form a government. This government would never have happened. New Hope of Gideon Saar, Yamina of Naftali Bennett, maybe even Yisrael Beitenu would have joined such a government. Yisrael Beitenu also have a problem being in a government with the ultra-Orthodox parties, but certainly those other two parties wouldn't have a problem. Maybe even Blue and White, maybe even Yesh Atid, who knows, could have formed a government very, very easily. And that's what Moshe Gafni was referring to, the fact that perhaps it's time to look at those other options. But as things stand, I think the chances of anyone else leading a bloc like that is extremely unlikely.
All right, thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you again for taking time to update us this week. For our viewers and listeners, please join us at Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Elal Zeiser discussing Israeli universities after American academics opted for BDS. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.